were found in 2 deep wells. The dust was removed, revealing colourful Egyptian hieroglyphics. Archaeologists say they'll release more details about their mysterious origin in a few weeks. Well, to what in the world last night, we brought you the story of an alpaca that interrupted a football game in England. Tonight, another pitch invasion, this time of the feathered variety. A training season session for Brazil's national soccer team was brought to a standstill when a parrot decided to land on a player's head. At least he was in the team colours. Officials eventually shooed the macaw away, where it flew across the pitch and landed on one of the goal nets. Apparently the parrot belongs to a family in Rio, which allows him to fly freely because he's domesticated and always returns home via a soccer pitch. Tonight's top stories. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will address the nation over new coronavirus restrictions that could last 6 months. A former real estate tycoon who criticised Chinese President Xi Jinping has been sentenced to 18 years jail over corruption charges. And Prince Charles says climate change poses such a severe threat that the world's only option is to adopt a military-style response. Well, let's return to our top story in the British Prime Minister's unveiling of a new set of restrictions to combat a second wave of coronavirus. While UK's opposition leader Keir Starmer has largely backed Boris Johnson's plan, he's also criticised the government for lacking leadership during the pandemic.
Families across the country will be anxious today. Many are already living under local lockdowns. Many more fear that soon they will. They're worried about their jobs, about their loved ones, and whether they will be able to spend Christmas with their families. They will also be worried that the government doesn't have a clear strategy. One day people are encouraged to work in the office. In fact, more than encouraged, they were openly challenged by the Prime Minister for not doing so. Today, they're told the opposite. This is a time of national crisis, and we need clear leadership.
More than 150 nations have joined the World Health Organization-led global plan for COVID vaccines. The goal of the COVAX scheme is to deliver 2 billion vaccine doses around the world by the end of next year. Healthcare workers will be prioritised initially, then the most vulnerable 20% of people in every participating country, regardless of income level.
Save lives, accelerate the economic recovery and ensure that the race for vaccines is a collaboration, not a contest. This is not charity. It's in every country's best interest. We sink or we swim together. The fastest route to ending the pandemic and accelerating the global economic recovery is to ensure some people are vaccinated in all countries, not all people in some countries. Recent opinion polls show the overwhelming majority of people support equitable access to vaccines.
Australia's domestic intelligence agency has revealed a dramatic rise in the number of violent right-wing extremists under surveillance, warning that some are now using Islamic State-style recruitment tactics. ASIO says the threat posed by neo-Nazis and other violent individuals now occupies up to 40% of its counter-terrorism caseload.
Some of the circumstances of COVID have contributed to an increase in radicalisation, in particular because of the amount of time that individuals are spending in isolation.
Labor has warned the government must list dangerous right-wing extremist groups as prescribed terrorist organisations. Well, suitcases full of cash being rolled into a bank branch, but for months it didn't raise any red flags. Now, that's the latest revelation from a massive leak of secret US Treasury documents involving suspicious transactions with global banks. The latest FinCEN files detail how money remitters in Australia were depositing bags of cash as part of an $80 million money laundering scheme. Here's Elise Worthington.
A money mule takes a suitcase filled with cash into a Westpac branch in Sydney's CBD. She'd made more than 10 trips and deposited millions by the time police found out in 2011.
The customer was going into the branch and just dropping the suitcase off and providing instructions to deposit it into a registered remitters account called Super Forex.
Money remitters help people move cash around the world and rely on big banks to do so.
The problem for the bank is, while they can assess the risk that the money remitter brings to them, what they don't have sight of are the customers of the money remitter. And it is a known source of money laundering.
In this case, the money mule was arrested and charged, but police discovered she'd already deposited more than $35 million into Westpac accounts.
31, 32, 33, 34.
Westpac and Super Forex met all their reporting requirements in terms of know your customer in this particular instance. Was there room for improvement? I would say there probably was.
Court documents later showed Super Forex misled Westpac staff, stating the depositor was one of its employees. Despite that revelation, Westpac continued to bank for Super Forex. Secret suspicious activity reports obtained by the ABC as part of a global leak reveal an American bank was worried about almost $15 million in suspicious transactions linked to Super Forex. Super Forex and Westpac did not answer specific questions, but both say they've improved anti-money laundering systems since the case. It's the latest in a series of revelations about behaviour by the world's biggest banks after a leak of secret US Treasury documents obtained by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists.
A lot more reaction than many of us expected and impact. We saw, for example, that the 5 major banks that featured in the FinCEN files had all seen their share price tumble.
More revelations from the leak are yet to come. Elise Worthington, ABC News.
US President Donald Trump says he has the support to get a vote on his Supreme Court pick, which will be announced by the weekend. President Trump is considering 5 women to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died on Friday at the age of 87. Justice Ginsburg's family says her last wish was to delay her replacement until another president is in office. President Trump has tried to discredit that statement, insisting it could have been the voice of someone else. He also denies he's trying to rush a Supreme Court nomination because he's worried about losing the election.
No concern. I just think it would be better. They asked, would I rather have it? I'd rather have it before the election. I think it would be better for our country. And we will pick somebody that's outstanding, very qualified. They're all qualified, but somebody that is outstanding. And I'd rather see it all take place before the election, so before November 3rd.
5 of the largest bushfires in California's history are still burning across the US state. Governor Gavin Newsom says almost 15,000 square kilometres have been charred by the blazes. The Bobcat fire in Los Angeles County has been burning for more than 2 weeks and is only 15% contained. Evacuation orders and warnings are in place for thousands of residents in foothill and desert communities. Officials say it could be days before teams determine the scope of the destruction.
19,000 firefighters from all across this state and across this nation are working 24/7 to address these wildfires. Some 2,400 engines as part of our mutual aid system that are deployed. 26 people tragically have lost their lives and 6,400 structures have been destroyed. Again, I caution everybody on these numbers. The 26 fatalities and the 6,400 structures are based upon what we have seen, what we have witnessed, but by no stretch of the imagination do we think this tells the entire story. As we get back in and people are able to repopulate, go back into their communities, we'll determine more structure loss.
Well, scientists in Botswana say they may have determined the cause behind the sudden deaths of more than 300 elephants earlier this year. Between May and June, hundreds of dead elephants were discovered in the Okavango Delta region, but the culprit remained a mystery. Now it's thought a bacteria found around algal bloom in the water and soil might be to blame. Let's get more with Dr. Neil McCann, the Director of Conservation at National Park Rescue. And just a warning, some of the images you might see during this interview might be quite distressing. Good to talk to you, Dr. McCann.
Nice to be back. Thanks for speaking to me.
What have you made of these new revelations that it was some form, that there was something in the water, some bacteria in the water? Do you think it's possible?
It's definitely possible. It's the theory that me and various other scientists were starting to conform around over the last few weeks of research. What we still don't know is exactly what cyanobacteria are involved, what toxins they create, why only elephants have been affected, and whether or not other animals, including people, might be affected in the future.
And that just right there is a good question. Why were only elephants affected if it was in the water where many elephants go and drink every day? No, and many other animals, sorry.
It's highly perplexing, but one thing we do know about neurotoxins is that they can be very species or even individual specific. So individuals within the same species can have wildly different responses to exposure to neurotoxins. My guess is that it's probably something to do with the anatomy or the physiology of elephants, or the way that they behave in and around water. That means that they have been more susceptible to deaths as a result of this, but we still don't quite know.
Climate has gone on the back burner, climate change has gone on the back burner during this pandemic, but there are concerning warnings about the impact on a number of species. Is climate change part and parcel of these kind of mysterious happenings?
100%. Climate change, as with so many things, is the threat amplifier. It takes these pre-existing threats and it makes them bigger, more likely and more frequent. And that's exactly what's happened here. So harmful algal blooms proliferate in warm conditions. And as this region of Africa warms up, which it is doing, these are only going to become more frequent and more severe in the future, which makes it all the more important for us to find out exactly what this is and then figure out a plan for how to mitigate it.
And is that happening?
Yes, on both fronts. So regional and international scientists are trying to identify exactly what is causing this, so the precise types of cyanobacteria and what toxins they create. And then myself and a small team are looking to try and create an early warning system of some form, probably using satellite data to identify where these blooms are occurring, and then you can put in a mitigation plan after that.
Some of these countries are very vulnerable financially. They don't necessarily have the money to put into conservation. How much of a problem is that?
Well, I think the problem is that people assume that conservation is a loss of finance, whereas what we realise over the last little while, COVID being the #1 example, is that we need to invest in conservation, otherwise the entire world collapses around us. COVID-19 virus, the pandemic, was caused by a breakdown in conservation. And if we look at the enormous cost of the fires in Australia over the last little while, that's from not investing in conservation early enough. And I believe that countries all across the world need to realise that this needs to be a part of their central financing. They need to be protecting wild places because we need that for a habitable planet.
We've had a distressing stranding of whales in Tasmania. Why doesn't, do you have any idea why events like this happen?
One of the very recent theories that's being proposed is that random stranding events such as this might be caused by long-term exposure to environmental neurotoxins, the same type of thing that may well have killed these elephants in Botswana. So whales and dolphins that have been stranded, and seals and manatees that have been dying in the sea, have been discovered to have high concentrations of neurotoxins in their brains, and also plaques, the type of amyloid plaques you see when people develop Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. So it is possible, it's being proposed, that these stranding events might be linked to toxicosis, leading to some form of dementia, and a mass stranding can happen because they've all been exposed at the same time. It's still very early days, the science is new, but I wouldn't be surprised if many of these previously unexplained phenomena are as a result of long-term exposure to environmental neurotoxins.
Yeah, which comes back again to your point about climate change. And though the loss of those 300 elephants is just so heartbreaking, what impact does it have on the global populations?
Well, I think that's another important point to make, is that we know that 330 have died because that's the number that they've counted. But elephants, dead or alive, are very difficult to count from the air, so we have to assume that the real number is much, much higher than that. The global population is just over 400,000. So we have to assume that 1% of the global population has died in a couple of months as a result of one event. That, for me, is very significant.